Hi, I'm Chris Kiergaard, Journal Star Associate Editor, alongside Journal Star Executive Editor Dennis Anderson.
Hello, everybody.
And we're joined today by Anni Reinking, who is one of two candidates for the Peoria Public Schools Board District 3 seat. Anni, thanks for coming in and talking to us about your candidacy.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me today.
Great. Let me jump in and ask you, and we'll be posting your full questionnaire and other information online for people to take a complete look at. But let me ask you from the start, talk about some of the specifics of your experience as an educator, as a parent, that you think would help make you a good board member if you're elected.
Excellent. So I have been in the field of education for 15 years. So I started out as a classroom teacher. I worked internationally for just a few months, and then I taught on the south side of Chicago, and then I came here to central Illinois to be back home. And so I was a classroom teacher, so I really have that ground level experience. I then decided that I really wanted to make a bigger impact, and so I went back for my master's and my doctorate. So I currently am a professor in the education department at Southern Illinois in Edwardsville, and I work directly with undergraduate and graduate teachers on methodologies, on content, and then I provide a lot of professional development. So currently, 15 years into education, I now am a researcher, I'm an author, I do a podcast, I do professional development, as well as educating the undergraduate and graduates and being in classrooms. And then I think why I was really driven to be part of running for this position is because I have skin in the game. My son goes to District 150. My husband and I moved right before he started kindergarten, and we made the conscious decision to stay in Peoria School District because of the quality education that I knew he would get, and also the diversity. We wanted him to be part of a community and a school that represented what the real world would be like. So he's now a fifth grader at Washington Gifted, but he has been in District 150 since kindergarten. And so really being a parent, being an educator, seeing that there's really great things, and then there's always areas for improvement in everything. And so that's kind of why I decided to run at this point.
Mm-hmm. And you'd be making a commitment to an unpaid position.
Correct.
With night meetings, afternoon meetings, unpaid.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that really shows my dedication not only to the district, but also to education, as in any board member who just decides to serve for that 5 years of unpaid. Some of the professional development I provide is unpaid. Some of the time that I spend in classrooms is unpaid. I call it my pro bono work. And it's really because I want to impact the future generation. It's not really about money for me, but it's really about that impact and making sure that we are creating equitable environments for all students. And so
that impact is also being a politician, too.
Correct.
What's been your experience involving that?
So officially, I have not been an official politician ever. I've never actually run for a political office, but I have been elected in organizations that focus specifically in education that are statewide and national-wide organizations. So I've been presidents of different organizations that focus on early childhood education specifically. And so that is not necessarily elected by the public, but it's elected by the people who are within that organization. And so that is kind of where my expertise comes from that. But as a public servant, I don't have any experience with that.
Given your experience in early childhood education in particular, and what you may have seen as a parent in the district, you know as well as I do how crucial it is for those very early, very formative years that you can build off of with students. What does our district need to do better during those early years? Maybe that either we aren't doing now or we aren't able to do for whatever reason.
Right. I think one of the biggest things when we talk about the district is that we really need to focus on the positives first. And I think the district is doing a lot of great things. They just opened kind of a new early childhood wing down at Woodruff. And so there is that, and that really dedication to early childhood, the funding that they've been able to secure, Valeska Hinton, the great things that Valeska Hinton is doing, and then the support that they provide Head Start, or the collaborations with Head Start. So I think the district is doing a lot of great things. However, there's always room for improvement. And so making sure that we are really focusing on that social emotional development is really the critical piece of building that foundation so that students can be successful throughout the rest of their grades. One of the things that I often talk about when I talk to people is what's called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is essentially that children need to feel safe before they can kind of move up in anything else. And so really we need to create those environments where there's safety, where there's room for learning, where there's room for growth. And so really being able to focus on that, because then we'll see the academics as a result of that work.
Okay. You said in your questionnaires you were responding to some of what we asked you, that part of your focus would be working on ensuring some consistency in schools, specifically on principals who create safe and welcoming communities. How do you do something like that? First, I think it's talking to principals. So I really want to make sure that in this position, I'm a voice for the teachers who are part of the union, and a voice for the principals who are not supported by a union. And I think knowing my own background, knowing what the research says, is that when principals are moved as frequently as they have been in District 150, that it creates I don't want to say animosity, but it creates school cultures that may not be as solid as they could be, especially for principals who really build that solid foundation of community and then are transferred. And so I really think that consistency is really important for the idea of building that community and building that safe environment for the students, for the families. And I think once we have that consistency, the impact of the community could be greater. I know that we already have a lot of great community support in a lot of our schools, but when you have the same stakeholder who is there, who you see is dedicated, I feel like there's a better probability that people are going to be invested in that school also, because they're going to see that investment from the administration.
How would you be that voice? Be more clear on that.
Yeah. So I would have conversations first. So first I need to be at the ground level and understand what's happening, but then also making sure that those voices are heard at the board level. So either saying I did an anonymous kind of survey and kind of seeing how principals are feeling and making sure that that voice is heard, because I also feel like principals need to have that safety net that I'm not going to, or any board member is not going to call them out. So bringing that voice to the table, asking questions, having those conversations. I don't want to say push back, but one of the qualities that I feel like I bring is being able to ask, I wonder if we leave principals in school districts or schools longer than 3 years. I wonder what would happen. I wonder what the social emotional aspect might say. And then that creates an environment where the board can talk, we can talk together, we can talk with the superintendent, we can talk with other stakeholders, and we can say, you know what, we've actually never tried that. But here's what the research says. So I'm very based in research, just from my own professional background. And if that's what the research says, then why aren't we trying it? And kind of just putting that questioning out there for individuals to have. And I also know that I can't change everything in this position. But what I want to do is I want to be a voice and I want to question. I want at least those questions to be raised in the fellow board members, the school districts, the community's minds, so that it's something like, oh, I wonder what would happen. Right? I wonder what that might do for our children. I wonder what that might do for our schools, and have those conversations. There's a lot of
experience in the administration and Dr. Karat. And you think that, are you thinking, from what I'm hearing, maybe you're not in support of what they're doing and they're not asking those questions?
I am in support of many things that Dr. Karat does and what the administration does. I think that, again, just kind of having that anecdotal conversations with principals that I associate with, that there is some, why am I being moved, right? And asking those questions. And so I would encourage Dr. Karat and the administration to look at the research and answer that question, right? Why are principals being moved so often? Why are principals being transferred? What's the reasoning behind that? I'm always someone who wants to ask why. And if you give me an answer, that's awesome. But if there's no answer to that why, then I think that's a place for that conversation.
And then where do you go with it if you get the answer that you don't like? What's next?
And then it's building. It's building that, it's not demanding anything, but it's building that understanding of, okay, this is your perception, this is my perception. Let's focus on a goal and work towards that goal. So the goal is to make sure that we're providing equitable environments for all students. I would hope that everyone on the board and everyone in administration would want to create those equitable environments for all students. So now let's bring in research, let's bring in conversations, let's bring in stakeholders, let's bring in community members and see how best we can create that, because that might not be created once we have stakeholder input. Once we have community members say, we have a different principal every 3 years, what is that telling my student who's there for 6 years? And so being able to have that experience. I rely back on my own experience when I was a very young teacher in my early 20s and worked at a charter school where we had a revolving door. And the revolving door for teachers and for administrators, and the sense of community changed every 2 years. And that was instability for educators, it was instability for the families, it was instability for the community, it was instability for everyone. Never really knowing what was going to happen with that revolving door, and never really being able to develop those really solid, deep relationships that are needed for learning. And so that's really where I would focus that conversation, coming in as a voice.
Do you have any similar concerns over teacher turnover? Because I know that can also be a factor that I've heard people speak of with teachers who frequently rotate through or who use PPS as a starting district and then look to move elsewhere, where you can sometimes lose that institutional knowledge or have a change in the spirit of a particular building.
Absolutely. But I think that it starts with leadership. So I think that a leader in a building can really make or break a community, a sense of community, and that stability really creates a sense of, I want to be there as an educator, or you know what, I don't feel comfortable, I don't feel part of this community. And so I think that once we really have that stability built into the communities and kind of, I don't want to call it buy-in, but kind of those relationships, then educators will want to be there because it will be a positive community to be in. It will be positive relationships. It will be something where they feel supported. So in some of the professional development I talk about the 4 C's. You need to feel courage in your environment. So if you have the support, you feel courage. You need to feel connected. So if the principal knows what you're doing in the classroom, supports what you're doing in the classroom, knows your name, that's feeling connected. You need to feel capable. So am I capable of being a really, really effective teacher because of the support I'm getting? And you need to feel cared for. Do I feel like I can be a leader in my school if that's what I want? Do I feel like if I have a concern about a student, is that something that's going to be addressed? And so being able to really build on those 4 C's is something that's research-based, but also really applicable in a school building.
All right. You mentioned some of your early experience as an educator came in charter schools.
Correct.
And obviously, we've not only this past year gone through the debate on whether or not to renew the charter for Quest, but also will be going through that debate
Yes.
beginning very shortly after the new board is seated in July, looking forward into the following year. Talk about some of your thoughts there, particularly you noted in the questionnaire the value of having choice and noted some of the problems with Quest as underperforming in many areas. And you said that there are both new initiatives and future initiatives allowing the district to provide some of those choices. What is there that's out on the horizon that the district can do? There's been suggestions, but I've not heard much in the way of specifics.
Right. So I think that, first of all, so charter schools are very different and everywhere. And I know you said that you were going to post my answers. And so I hope that those of you who read the answers look at kind of the differences between charter schools. But I also know that the community that I just was talking about has not been solid at Quest because of the turnover in leadership that anyone can see when they go onto a job board and they see that leadership positions at Quest are often posted. So that sense of community is not built. It might have been built when it first started, but that has not happened in the recent years. And then the data shows a decrease in academic and social emotional development and those types of things. So choice is super important, and I think having choice is important for all families. Options that are in District 150 currently are options that include, a lot of them are, that I know of right now, I would have to do some more investigation, are at the high school level. So the D2 program, the online program, having an IB program, having a culinary program. I mean, all of those are really great options to show that we don't have a one-track mind in District 150, that we are not preparing you for college, we're preparing you for college and career readiness. And so being able to provide those opportunities. I know that as my son, who goes to Washington Gifted, which I know may have different experiences than other middle schools in the community. I think that he's also offered many opportunities. I also think that what John Morris has done at the Peoria Riverfront Museum is excellent. Every single child in District 150 gets to go to Peoria Riverfront. I have a personal relationship with John, and so at one time when we were talking, he told my father and I about a story about a person who came into the museum who didn't look like what you might call a normal museum goer. And so, as people may know John Morris, he went up and talked to that man and said, "Hey, like, what are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, my little girl came here with her class and said it was so neat, and she asked me to take her this weekend. Like, I've never been to a museum before. This is awesome." So I think those opportunities, those community connections are really, really important for not only the students, but also for the community wider.
Some of those opportunities that you mentioned, is the bandwidth wide enough to allow the number of interested students to participate in those things, and is there opportunity to grow those even down into the middle school level in some of the opportunities that are offered? Or is that going to require too much whole-scale reworking of the curriculum, more money that isn't there pushed into some of those things?
Yes, I think that it can be, it's a process, right? You can't say, well, we're going to take what we're doing in 9th through 12th grade and we're just going to throw it into every middle school for 5th through 8th. It's a process. So maybe we add it to all of the 8th grades and we have to do a pilot study and we have to see what's working, what's not, because what works in 9th through 12th may not necessarily work for 8th graders. And so being able to do that and then moving it down to 7th. I do think that the district has the bandwidth. I do think they have the knowledge. I do think they have the expertise. It's just getting that financial support, which could happen with a decrease in funding for Quest. It could happen in other ways if we get federal funding or other types of things to help fund that. I think the knowledge and the expertise is there. It's just how to have that sustainability, which is really important when you are implementing a new program in a school district.
You're a very involved parent.
Yes,
I can tell. And when you talk to teachers, you hear that I maybe have just a handful of parents come in for parent-teacher night and that. What would you do, or what needs to happen to get more parent involvement?
Right, and so. I think people may be tired of me referring back to research often, but that's really where my basis is, and that's really where I base a lot of my discussion. So one of the courses I teach right now to undergrads is talking about the difference between involvement and engagement. And involvement means we have parent-teacher conferences at 3 o'clock. You must be there. This is when you need to come. This is what's happening. When engagement is, hey, let me hear about your schedule. Oh, you can't make it because you work seconds? Well, what might work for your schedule? And so it's sometimes I refer to it as that customer service type of approach to education, which some people may push back on, but knowing the demographics and the working styles of parents today, you have to do that. There are some times when my husband and I both cannot make a 5 o'clock parent-teacher conference meeting because of our work schedules, because we both work full-time. And as you said, as an involved parent, that is heartbreaking to me. But for parents that may not even cross their mind because their parents never went to their parent-teacher conferences, it wasn't part of their upbringing, being able to have engagement rather than involvement. So having somehow working with the union, working with the board, working with administration to have more of that flexibility of what does engagement look like, rather than saying, we always have this at this time, so you must come if you're an involved parent and you're engaged. Well, that doesn't work for everybody's schedule. So what does that look like? And so it's really rethinking of how we see parents and families in the classroom. And that not everybody has a parent. Not everybody has a mom and dad. When I was working many, many hours, my dad essentially was my son's parental figure, because I could never make it to school, right? So when I was a single mom before I married my current husband, my father was there more than I was. And so I'm sure that many families are experiencing that also. So it's really changing our mindsets through conversations. Again, it can't happen overnight. It's showing that we will have more engagement if we are able to provide more flexibility. And it may not be conducive for every school environment, but it's something to at least think about and understand. When you say 3 o'clock or 5 o'clock be here and parents don't show up, that doesn't mean that they don't care about their child. That is not what it means. It means that they can't make it at 5 o'clock. And so being able to kind of reconceptualize that.
One of the things that we've talked about a fair amount over the last 2 decades in particular is the need for some physical plant changes in the schools, not least air conditioning, which is being installed now as part of the county facility sales tax, to allow for the potential move over to a balanced calendar. That's really not gotten a lot of traction overall, partly because the work hasn't been done yet. Where are you on balanced calendar and a change over to that for the schools?
I think it would have to be a discussion. I as a parent and as a professor and as someone who works, I don't have an opinion, right?
The research would seem to indicate that it's better overall
better.
for students. They don't have the summer brain drain. Right.
They don't have the summer brain drain. However, you also have to consider what that means for the working world and for the community, right? And so it would have to be, now Valeska Hinton is already on it.
Right.
And they seem to be doing great on that schedule. I think that if District 150 was to do that, it would need to take a lot of conversations and a lot of stakeholder buy-in. That means that stakeholders need to be at the table and have those conversations. I think some of the initiatives that have been tried, either successfully or unsuccessfully, have, I don't want to say failed, but maybe not have been as successful as possible, is because it was almost like, this is what's happening, get on board with it, rather than really bringing stakeholders to the table. So as an example, as a parent, when I learned that the school day was going to be, or was proposed to be different, where middle school would start later.
Since we have one of the, talking about start times rather than length of the day.
Right.
Because we do have one of the shortest school days, bar none, in the state.
Right, yes.
In PPS.
But yeah, so I was talking about start times. Okay. But yeah, that is also true that is something to consider, right? Yeah. But I was as a parent, when I learned about the start times, now I might not have been engaged in meetings that might have been provided, but I was in shock when I opened that letter and thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with my son? That means I have to pay more money for before and after school care. What is that going to do to my budget? And so I think those conversations need to be had, and those pros and cons need to be talked about. I think down the road, Peoria District 150 should be a balanced schedule. Now, isn't that in 5 years? I'm not sure. Is that in 10 years? I don't know. Valeska Hinton, those students are already experiencing it, so maybe it's a progression. Maybe it's progressing into that. There's always, there's never a black and white. There's always a gray area, and figuring out what that gray area is best for the community is how I like to approach things.
You talked about some other initiatives to explore, and I want to drill down a little bit just so that I can understand better what they are. You talked about responsive classroom and or BIST. What exactly are those?
Yep. So responsive classroom is based in SEL, so based in social emotional learning, which is really building that community. And it's a way to really bring in brain science into the classroom through logical consequences. So rather than having kind of a clip chart, which if you look at research, it shows that it really doesn't develop the brain. If you have the rewards, the incentives and rewards and punishments, that really doesn't develop the brain. So looking at brain science and having that responsive classroom with logical consequences is more like now this is kind of a crude way to say it, but the punishment fits the crime. So if you decide, so in an early childhood classroom, like if you decide to throw a block across the block area, then it's, oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry that we made that choice today. We're going to need to move to another area because our hands aren't being safe. Instead of, go move your clip or get out of the block area. And so it's that conversation. It's really helping build that brain. And it's building what the prefrontal cortex, which is where a lot of that impulse control and that cause and effect is. And that's really kind of where the basis for responsive classroom is building that community. And then BIST is something that, so I'm currently working on my principal endorsement. So I'm an intern in Dunlap District, just to kind of make sure that I'm not crossing paths with running as I'm running for Peoria District. And BIST is something that a lot of the elementary schools in Dunlap use. And it's, again, thinking about brain, how the brain works, and how to build that community. And so I think as a researcher, I know that making sure that we understand how the brain works is very, very important. How I parent, how I teach is really focusing on if someone is stressed, if someone doesn't have that lowest safety of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, their brain cannot learn. Physically, their brain cannot learn. And so really thinking about that. And then knowing kind of the poverty level in some of the zip codes in Peoria, knowing some of the traumatic experiences that children in Peoria District may face in their lifetime, that BIST and responsive classroom also speak to that because it talks about how when I do professional development, we talk about your dragon brain. So when you are high stressed, when you have trauma in your life, when your brain hasn't been able to develop at a typical whatever typical is at a typical rate, your dragon brain turns on and you're in hypervigilance. When you're in hypervigilance, you're not going to learn. And so it's really thinking about how can we help children cope so that their hypervigilance can go down, so that they're not constantly on the gas pedal, but their foot can lift up and relax for a little bit. And how we can really help with that so that we can move up in that Maslow's hierarchy of needs and get those academics and making sure that we really have that.
Do you have any concerns on how, all that sounds great.
Right.
But the reality is you're dealing with a lot of problems in the school district.
Yes.
And different problems.
Different problems.
From school to school, and you're looking at a 60% graduation rate or
Yes.
something. How do you take all these things that sound outstanding, it could lead to great success, and work that in right now with all the struggles the district is facing?
Absolutely. Well, they're already addressing some of this, and I forget what it's called. It's not in my head, but at Tree when they have...
The wraparound center, right?
Is on the second floor? Yeah. So they are already addressing some of that with trauma-informed practices that they're already engaged in with that. And so it's, first of all, administration buy-in. It's a dedication to it. It's maybe funding towards it, and it's changing school cultures. So again, it's not a magic pill. It's not something that's going to happen in overnight, in a week, in a month, but it's something that changes the whole culture. And while many people in education want something that I can do, and it's going to fix it right now, you're dealing with people's brains. You're dealing with years of trauma. You're dealing with years of poverty. You're dealing with years of things that you need to make sure that teachers are educated enough to be able to provide those supports in the classroom day in and day out. And so it's educating teachers. It's something that possibly could be completed with steps in 5 years. Now, does that sound great to all educators? No. But if you look at how education changes, you have to put the time in, you have to put the energy in, and you have to have those days where you feel like nothing is going right, to have those days that really do make a change in the lives of our students. And that's really what trauma-based, trauma-informed classrooms and equity lens and education really focuses on, is having that. So it's not a magic pill that's going to solve it, August 17th of 2020, but it's something that we can really kind of build a culture of learners for teachers so that they can build that culture within their classrooms.
Okay. I want to ask you two other fairly brief questions, and then I think we're going to wrap it up unless there's anything else. Number one, there's been some discussion, including some school board support for the notion of a change in state law to re-enable the police force for Peoria Public Schools rather than just having safety officers. Is that something that you're in favor of?
It's not a yes or no question. I think that you need to look at how police officers are trained to handle situations within the buildings. You need to look at how city police officers are trained and how SROs are trained, the security resource officers, how they're trained, and making sure that they're trained with that idea that a 15-year-old's brain is not developed. So putting handcuffs on them and putting them in a police car is not, or carrying weapons is not something that will teach them anything, because our brains don't fully develop until we're about 25. So we're still really dealing with those adolescent brains and understanding what cause and effect is. And so really thinking about, I'm more of an advocate for mental health consultants. So our SROs or our police officers, whoever is in the building, are they trained in mental health practices? Maybe they don't have letters behind their name that indicate that, but do they understand the mental health practices that really impact our students?
It will be at the board level a yes or no question. So are you in favor or not in favor of having police?
I would need to get more information on their training. So
that doesn't answer my question.
I don't have a yes or no question or answer right now. If you had documentation in front of me right now so I could see the training, I would definitely give you an yes or no. But I don't have a yes or no because I don't know the training that police officers in Peoria have or that the SROs have.
Okay. And I also want to give you an opportunity to speak to this because we've established you're a busy parent, you're a working educator, everything else. This is an enormous time commitment that's not just 2 to more hours on the second and fourth Monday of every month. It's also committee meetings that are in the heart of the afternoon on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. It's getting out into the community and doing public engagement. It's getting out into the schools and visiting as a board member to hear these things one-on-one from educators or principals or other administrators. Is that something that you can make the time commitment to be able to do thoroughly over that 5 years?
Absolutely. So I have already stepped down or have concluded my terms as some of the presidents. So I had 2 or 3 president terms for the last 2 years. So I've already stepped down from those in organizations. I'm already in schools a lot, not only in my son's school, but in other schools volunteering. I'm going to go read a book next week at one of the elementary schools. So I'm already in schools and making those kind of public appearances. And then I also I am an organized person, but I'm also strategically making it so that I can make sure to dedicate my time to this if I am elected, because I am so passionate about this, and I know that Peoria is doing great things for their students, and I want to be part of that growth.
Anything else?
Nope.
All right. Well, Anni Reinking, Peoria Public Schools candidate for Board District 3, thank you very much for coming in and talking to us for a little while today.
Thank you very much.